Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to our first Inside Out talk for this academic year. The mission of our prestigious Inside Out lecture series is to bring the best minds of our generation to inspire and support the work of our students and staff across the school, School of Arts at Leeds Beckett University. My name is Marion Harrison, Senior Lecturer in Fine Art, and with Helen Little, Curator of Exhibitions at Leeds Art Gallery, we are delighted to be hosting today's talk, What Kind of City, with Suzanne Lacy. Suzanne will talk for approximately 45 minutes, and then Helen will be chairing the Q&As with Suzanne. If you have a question, please do use the Slido hashtag on the slide on your screen at the moment. One of Suzanne's early seminal works, Whisper, the Waves, the Wind, 1983 to 1984, is currently exhibited as part of Radical Reel at Leeds Art Gallery, which explores 40 years of artists' film and video in the gallery's renowned collection. The work has a special resonance, given Leeds Art Gallery was the first public institution in the UK to acquire Suzanne's work. Suzanne Lacy is an artist, writer and teacher whose groundbreaking socially engaged practice spans over 4 decades. Since the early 1970s, Suzanne has used performance and socially engaged practice to both explore women's lives and experiences and to challenge power structures. She collaborates with artists and a wide range of community organisations and groups to address urgent concerns, including racial injustice, gender inequality, labour rights, ageing, immigration, sexual violence, and economic and political injustice. Suzanne also writes extensively about her work, analysing and reflecting on the relationship between art and social intervention, and critically advocating the political potential of socially engaged art practice. Suzanne is Professor at the University of Southern California in the Roski School of Art and Design, and she has just been awarded the California Arts Council Legacy Artist Fellowship Grant 2021-2022. Suzanne began her studies in 1969 in psychology at California State University in Fresno, and with her friend and fellow artist Faith Wilding, established the first feminist group on campus. She was a student of Judy Chicago's feminist art program in 1970, and when the program moved to the newly established Cal Arts in Los Angeles, she moved too, and joined the women's design program run by Sheila de Bretteville. It was at Cal Arts that she met and was taught by Alan Capro, and his ideas on performance and art life practice had a profound and lifelong effect on Suzanne and her work. She has written about how she and other feminist artists felt that Capro at that time guided them to frame their personal and public lives as art. It is this reflective and political conversations and acts that we can see in Suzanne's current exhibition, Uncertain Futures and Cleaning Conditions at Manchester Art Gallery until next May 2022. And Suzanne arrived in the UK last week, and I am delighted to be sitting next to her and speaking with her today at the Whitworth Art Gallery, where she is currently working on her new project, which opens later this month on the 26th of November. Thank you, Suzanne, for taking the time to talk to us today. I'm now going to move my camera towards Suzanne, and she will start the talk. So just bear with me one moment.
Thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate the invitation, and indeed I am grateful to Leeds, not only for doing one of the earliest acquisitions of my work, but also for the incredible care that the tech team and the faculty and curator have had in trying to put together this lecture today. You know, there are many ways to frame my work, and I work in a variety of subject matters that you won't be able to tell today, because I'm going to be speaking specifically coming off of Whisper, the Waves, the Wind, as that is the work that was acquired by the Leeds Art Gallery so many decades ago. There are ways to frame my work in terms of the topics, this one, aging, and I'll be talking about 3 other projects on aging. You could also choose ethical issues. You could look at it in terms of organizing strategies, and you could look at it in terms of aesthetic questions. And the type of aesthetic questions I'm interested in are, to some degree, how time, how conceptual or concept, how engagement, how relationality is shaped. And those ideas came into practice, I think, at least in my experience, around the 70s, and was part of a very significant part of the creation of the performance art movement. I'm also interested, in terms of my writing, in rationalizing these temporal practices within the visual arts. So I'm going to be talking about 3 projects in depth, 2 of them leading on, as I said, from this project, Whisper the Waves, the Wind, which is on display at the Leeds Art Gallery today. So as I said, I'm going to stick with this particular topic of women and aging for a couple of times, a couple of exhibitions here that I'm going to show you. The first project is the Crystal Quilt, and that came after Whisper the Waves, the Wind. And the political question I was interested in at that time was, an aesthetic question, was how does an artwork actually impact large-scale public perception? What's really possible to increase in scale to the degree that you could have an impact on the way people actually perceived women as they get older? And that's interestingly like a trajectory of Alan Capro's, where after his happenings in New York, he began to plan larger and larger scale, and including a national event that he was interested in doing. And at that point, he made and when I met him, he had made an abrupt reversal to very intimate conceptual pieces. So this piece, the Crystal Quilt, I was thinking a lot about scale. So I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1980, I don't know, 3, 5, something like that, and began to teach at an art school there. And at that time, the media statistics, and I've always been really interested in mass media and its impact on our sensibilities, our politics, and our behavior with each other. At that time, studies in the media suggested that older women were the least represented people in mass media. The image of the older man was very often this kind of image, and image of older women began to kind of be represented as institutionalized, as frail, and so on. And so this project set out to directly challenge that. We invited, with the University of Minnesota, 35 women from throughout the state who came together monthly over the course of 5 or 6 months to look at what was the specific leadership style or styles of older women. This is with the Humphrey Institute's Reflective Leadership Program. Out of that, a group of women, about 12 of those women joined me and a variety of artists and producers over the course of the next 2 years. We worked together, and one very important part of this project was to shift, as we understood, older women were not visible in the media. It was important to us to shift that experience perception. And so we created a media campaign on the visibility of older women, and we taught the women we were working with how to do media in their communities. So in the leadership seminar, there were people from the Ojibwe Nation, there were people from small farm communities, and there were heads of universities and heads of business. So it was a really wide range of women, and all of those women took upon themselves the task of increasing the visual presence of older women and their achievement. Through 2 years on, we chose this place. This is the Crystal Court, which is the Philip Johnson design building that sits right at the center of Minneapolis, connected by all these skyways because of the amount of snow that was there at the time. We thought this was a really interesting place to produce a performance that would, after the media campaign, a series of educational projects, a series of community organizing projects that would culminate in a performance that would take place on Mother's Day in 1987 at the Crystal Court. And I invited Miriam Shapiro, one of my former teachers, Miriam the painter to come to Minneapolis and work with the Minnesota quilters to design a quilt, a color pattern and a quilt that would be the prototype for the performance staging. And here we are with some of our committee of older women thinking through colors and how they operate in that space. One of the things I think to point out in this work is a real care about aesthetic qualities and how you create a large scale, spectacular event within a very complex public setting. The other thing, this is a group of my Minneapolis Advisory Committee and women from San Diego, Whisper the Waves, the Wind, who came to Minneapolis to share their experiences with women in Minneapolis. So there were San Diego and Minneapolis older women working on these projects represented here. On we went with 150 people helping to plan the project and being stage managers, stage people on the day of the event. And here's a couple of nights before when people had flown in from all over, and we had filmmakers and people who were going to act as theater directors and so on in the one of the mini office spaces we had taken over for the production. Here's one of the planning, the media production team. There's filmmakers and photographers here in this setting, and we're sitting right in the middle of the Crystal Court. And you can see by looking at this, the complexity of this particular visual environment and the sonic qualities meant that we had to have a lot of people thinking through what would hold the scale of the space, what kind of sound would be needed, and so on. And so here we are on the night before the performance, and we are, at this point, we're discovering that this 82-foot by 82-foot quilt is the wrong size by about a foot. And you couldn't, because everything was absolutely measured, you couldn't just cut it out or take off a corner, and we're figuring out how to do it. There's Miriam Shapiro and I and a couple of stage managers trying to figure out how to redo this in the middle of the night. Here's the chairs shipped in from Tennessee and the setup of a very elaborate sound system. And here's the morning of the event. When the Minnesota quilters, you'll see in the short video I'm going to show you, you'll see the quilters come in, and at the last, they made special tablecloths, and at the last minute they had missed one. So what's going to happen here are there are performers on this ground floor and audience. On the second floor, there are audience, and on the third floor is the directing booth. It was also live broadcast on television at the same time. Then on Mother's Day, a couple hours before, the women started arriving, and you never know exactly how many people are going to arrive. That was Etta Furlow, and this is the writer Mère de la Sour, and they're being received. They go downstairs, they're being oriented, and here they are. Right in the middle is Avis Foley from San Diego, who came in for this performance. They go onto the stage, unfold tablecloths, and perform. What you'll see now is a short 2-minute video clip.
I'll be 70 years old come July 9th.
The idea was to address the cultural invisibility of older women through art and through action. We called it the Whisper Minnesota Project. In the mid-'80s, I moved to Minnesota and began a 3-year production involving hundreds of volunteers. The Whisper Minnesota Project culminated in the Crystal Quilt, a performance staged in the center of Minneapolis on Mother's Day with 430 women over 60 years of age. The Whisper Minnesota Project is on one hand, it's conceptual artwork. It's an event that has taken a series of activities that has taken place in a community for 2.5 years, culminating with a theatrical sort of special, which is the Crystal Quilt performance. On the other hand, it's a complex community action almost. It's a bringing together of players from a variety of arenas to focus on an issue. And the issue is how do we think of older women? How do older women think of themselves? Is there a discrepancy between those visions? Can we do something through art to inspire people to look differently at the lives of older women, both the older women themselves and the people who are observing older women or not observing them, as the case may be.
I'm Janabelle Taylor, and I'm from St. Paul.
Well, my name is Rusk Anderson, and I live in Scandia, Minnesota.
My name's Grace Gibbous. I'm from Circle Pines.
Well, I'm from Minneapolis, and my name is Avis Foley.
I was asked, is getting older what you expected it would be? Is being older better or worse, or just different? What is positive about being older? What are the new pleasures? How has your perspective of the world changed? How do you feel about death? Has your idea of death changed since you were young? It has, of course.
Well, we've never sat down and talked about what it means to be an older woman. And it was really thrilling to get their ideas, and it was a very interesting exchange.
We were sharing the common thread of being older women, sitting there very proud with wrinkles and circles under our eyes and gray hair, and still feeling very, very beautiful and special.
Well, my name is Elva Trudell. I'm going to be 90 years old.
My name is Lucille Hagenbrack. Oh, I'm 65.
My name is Hazel Cherney, and I'm 75 years young.
My name is Elsie Gobranson, and I live in Proctor.
And the hope that maybe this will increase the influence of, I'll call them female values, cooperation rather than competition, being willing to work with impermanent things and not feel you have to make a great success. I think women's values are very important, and I hope that this will strengthen the recognition of these values for the future.
Marjorie Cox, 68. My Ojibwe name is Bishu.
I think a lot of senility comes from the fact that nobody asks you anything. Or, nobody can include you in the social ceremonials. Nobody asks you to speak, and pretty soon you lose your memory. Or nobody listens. I suffer a lot from people not listening to me. It's like not having a great aged tree to sit under, or to protect you, or to look at, or to feel. I think it's a great cultural loss.
I'm Jane McDonough, 73.
I'm Dorothy Pratt. I'm 67.
Guadalupe Rodríguez, tengo 74 años. Tengo 68 años.
I'm Myra Bourne. I'm 92.
I'm Meredith Sir. I say I'm not aging, I'm ripening. I say I'm not aging, I'm ripening.
And now what I'd like to do is show you how all that came together in a very quick way. This is a 24-hour time lapse, and I think it'll give you a sense of the way it was put together. This is not meant to be part of it, but there it is. So this is the site being cleared, And one of the things we really dealt with in terms of color was what kind of color would hold that visually complex environment. Here's the middle of the night when the rug is being found to be too large. And we have a bunch of engineers there trying to figure out how to do it. Now we're, again, the middle of the night, setting up tables. Each table was secured in place by a little cup that held, because as you can imagine, this can't change, or it will, if a table moves, it will completely distort the image that Miriam Shapiro designed. You see over there the last hold-out tablecloth. Now they've put it on. These tablecloths were made so that they looked black, but when people sat down and opened them up, it would reveal a pattern. It's mid-morning now. The women are arriving and they're being given lunch and given last-minute orientations. And in a minute, on Mother's Day, you'll see them entering the space. The audience is arriving. About 2,000 people came. There they are performing, and they're having real-time conversation. And if you look closely, you'll see on cue, they change their hand patterns. Here's the crazy quilt, where the audience comes in and retrieves their moms and grandmoms, bringing beautiful covered scarves. And now, as they go off to Mother's Day lunch, we're disassembling the space. Okay, and we'll go on to the next project that I want to show you. And this is in 2012, Catherine Wood from Tate Modern invited me to redo or rethink the crystal quilt. And since I don't redo projects, I do like to rethink them and think about how some of the earlier ideas of the first project might be played out in a different time in a different place. And in this case, what was happening in England in 2012 and 2013 was a look back at the women who had contributed to various social movements, in this case, Grenham Commons. It was one of the anniversaries of women's activism from the 15 years of, I think it was around 1950 to 1990 we were looking at. And what was very interesting to me was there's, on the one hand, this celebration of women's activism in everything from labor to housing to disability rights to gay rights to women's rights that really changed over those 40 to 50 years, changed the face of England and its culture. On the other hand, under the austerity that was coming into place in the mid, after 2010, there was a vilification of older women, and there would be incidents on buses where older women would be told that there was this feeling of in austerity that there wasn't enough money. And one of the things that there wasn't enough money for was older women who, and the NHS, for example. So there was a lot of that kind of dual appreciation for these same women now who were being deprecated. And so Silver Action was an updating very specifically for the British context at Tate Modern, an updating of Crystal Quilt. And what we did was we formed, the education department formed conversational groupings where women created, enacted timelines and their own roles within those timelines. And it was quite interesting. You could see how in the 50s, the idea of not being able to go to college or not being able to buy a home or enter into a contract gave way in the 80s to things like Grenham Commons. And then on the day of the performance, after lots of organizing, we invited 500 women to participate in a series of 4 tableaus that would take place over the entire afternoon, 1 hour after another after another. And here they are lining up to go into the first tableau. And this tableau, you can see, has reflections of Crystal Quilt in the coloring and the idea of women sitting at tables. But it has the addition of these 5 screens in the back, which I call my after Kentridge work, because Kentridge had left those 5 screens and projectors in the space, which I was very happy to take advantage of. So this is a comparison between old school kitchen table organizing, which took place within the 70s, and social media advertising or movement formation and other forms of activism that take place. So within these tableaus, about 500 women came and went, group after group, and they sat around talking about some pre-established questions. At each table, there was a younger, often person, a person that was dealing with social media, and they were translating the live conversation into a social media practice, which was going out on blogging. Other women were being interviewed about the first moment they began entering into what they would consider an activist position. It might be noticing that your father was always sitting at the head of the table. It might be going on your first march. And as they spoke to these typists, their words were going up on the wall. So it was a live archive collection of data. And here is another part of the installation. And this is, again, a series of leaders, women who were involved in the mine workers strike, women who were involved in all kinds of activism, sitting around a table, and these women are filmed. I'm going to show you just a section of this a video, just to give you a flavor of it before we go on.
It's over there. Yeah, the little one. Yeah.
We're so embarrassed. We're not supposed to connect with people. I'm sorry.
When I finally told them, they went absolutely mad. So it was a very good lesson to me in how that is not the way to go about things. You couldn't do it now. You would never get permission from any research committee or anything. But in those days, it was perfectly normal. I mean, at University College, they had a thing called the Survey of English Usage. Sorry, am I going too far?
No, it's fine.
And they were collecting a 1 million word corpus of English.
What was the name of this thing that was collecting this?
Survey of English Usage.
We were all struggling around these issues. How do we make these links between these different forms of inequality and forms of subservience as well as, domination? And I think that that's a legacy that has now, over the years, kind of taken shape, and I think younger women are, I hope that they are beginning to take account of those sorts of links.
I think the whole intersectional approach to feminism and to political struggles here developed earlier, I think, than in other places in Europe, and in a different way, I think, than in the United States. And it also was very connected with the anti-colonialism and post-colonialism movement, and the fact that so many of us come from different parts.
And as soon as I came to England, I did encounter women's liberation, and that was just an amazingly exciting thing for me as a single mother, as I soon became. And I was very quickly involved in all those early campaigns, the Family Allowance campaign and rights to reproduction and unionisation of unskilled workers. All sorts of things just began to pile up, and I made lots of friends, and it was the most exciting time. And
so I became a campaigner, and I decided nothing was moving here, so I went after the avant-garde and decided France the place. You know, I'll go to Paris and find Simone de Beauvoir. Well, all I ever found, honestly, was the book, and I read it.
It is really important that all women come together to show solidarity, and that if you want to fight against racism, then the only way to fight against racism is to show solidarity.
Massive workload, our resident artist, the creative one. And the songs, who's going to bring all the songs together?
Oh, we can do that later.
Newer work and a very different topic, but close to home here in Northwest England. And that is a project in Pendle that I took on with in situ super slowway and slowways and building bridges produced by super slowways in the town of Briarfield. Most of you will be familiar with the decimation of the mill work and mill culture that grew up, that was here since the 50s, the Pakistani and before, but the Pakistani culture who came to work in the mills, and the fact that during this time from the 50s, 60s into the 90s, and when the mills started closing, these cultures, the Muslim culture and Christian culture, were more closely blended than they are today. And since the demise of the mills, there has been less opportunity for engagement between people. The northwest of England has suffered a lot from this deindustrialization and the loss of good jobs. And in this context, there were a group of artists, cultural producers, and activists who were and are today very, very intent on changing the climate and the culture and the economic position of Northwest England. I was fortunate to work with Building Bridges Pendle and a group of Sufi chanters who will, I'd like to point out, be present both in terms of the video that you'll see at the Manchester Art Gallery, and also they will be here for some of the programming that we'll be doing around the opening. So we began to work understanding the way in which the closure of the mill had impacted families, and began to do interviews with mill workers. We interviewed 75 people whose family had worked in the mills or who themselves had worked in the mills. And in these very short interviews, we asked them questions about what their projection of the future was, what they thought about current conditions in terms of race and economics. We started, and that's Paul Hartley right there, the blonde guy with the beard standing in the corner. And I asked him, could he organize not 10 people, but 1,000 people over the course of the next year and a half. And bravely, he began to move forward to create a Pendle-wide network. We started with dinners. And of course, it was very important that Muslim culture not be represented tokenistically, but that everything was half and half Muslim, half Christian culture. We brought this man in the beard, the white beard, in from Kentucky. He is a shape note expert and a fiddler, a musician from the United States, and we reintroduced into this small town both Sufi chanting and which was currently being undertaken by the Building Bridges people, and we reintroduced shape note music, which originated in, some people believe originated in the Lancashire area. So we engaged the community after a year of working in 3 full days of performance. And in the performances, there were tours where people got to see the inside of this Briarfield mill that was slated for gentrification, urban renewal, and redevelopment. Because people in this region were quite concerned that the legacy of the mill closures, meaning that the Muslim and Christian cultures would be more and more separated, We were afraid that this mill would be redeveloped into homes for commuters to Manchester who would never go into the Briarfield proper. And so part of this whole agenda was to bring the voice of people in this community and their needs into the redevelopment plan. So they were, over the course of 3 days, they could sign up for tours of the mill. They could watch the filmmakers set up. And this is the first time I began to work with Mark Thomas of Soup Inc. As a filmmaker. And they filmed the entire third day, which was a series of musical lessons. As you can see here, we've put the interviews up, and we created a singing and chanting lessons day called the Circle and the Square. And that's because the Sufis sit in a circle and shape note singers sit in a square for their music. Both forms, or both of the vocalization forms, are quite spiritual, and they are a cappella. And so we filmed it, and then later that night, we created a dinner for 500 people, the largest region had seen. Work has continued. This is Hasnain and Jules, who are creating a Nasheed Boys Choir. There's lots of work that's been going on culturally. They serve as a model, I think, for us in Manchester. So I'd like to finish the next few minutes talking about 3 additional projects along with the Circle in the Square that will be premiered in England for the first time. One of them is actually an international premiere. It's the first time it will be seen outside of, Belfast, where it had a different shape. This project, this exhibition that I'm inviting all of you to is taking place across the Whitworth and the Manchester Art Gallery. The Manchester Art Gallery is already opened, and the Whitworth opens November 26th. And the name of this show is What Kind of City? Was conceived with staff and the director of MAG and the Whitworth, Alistair Hudson. And the idea is to show 4 artworks across the 2 venues, which allow us to look carefully at the templates they offer for social change, and to think about over the next few months how change can be enacted within the inspiration using the strategies of these artworks. And this is part of a project that I'm involved with personally in terms of a museum in Moscow called the VAC Foundation, and one in New York called the Queen's Museum. And in all of these cases, I'm looking at the ways in which art and learning, community engagement actually come together within an institution. I would like to mention the Serpentine Gallery as well, and my work with them early on to think through some of these issues. So now I want to show you at the Whitworth was Across and In Between, and that is a really stunning installation that features the work of many artists, the photographer Helen Sloan, the sound designer Pedro Rebello, filmmaker Mark Thomas, and Graham Kay, and just lots and lots of other artists and practitioners. Another one we're showing is Across and In Between, and that's a project sponsored by 1418 Now and the Belfast International Art Festival. And it explores in 2018 the border of Ireland. And you'll see in this installation a large 3-screen video projection, plus documentary, plus sound piece, photographic works, and timelines which situate this work within both contemporary and historic cultures. As you know, Brexit, and this is done in the middle of Brexit, it was most difficult and challenging and remains so, having to do with the border that runs across Ireland, and which now I believe is in the middle of the ocean. So at this moment, none of that had been determined. There were lots and lots of arguments and meetings that were being held between Brussels and London, almost none of which were taking place in Northern Ireland. So working with the producer and a variety of artists, again with Mark Thomas, we worked across the fields of the 5 different locations on the border to create yellow lines. And in each of these lines were ephemeral. They came together, they disappeared, and they were actually quite funny. This is a bridge that separates Northern Ireland from Ireland, and those are people dancing on the bridge. Here are young people in their yellow canoes trying to find the border that exists in the middle of that lake. Here are horses tromping across ephemeral border, runners running along a border, and tractors and farms showing, lining up yellow bales of hay. Finally, we invited 130 people from the border to create a Border Peoples Manifesto in the middle of Stormont. Stormont is Belfast, or Northern Ireland's capital, and it was currently closed because of, and the workings of the state had been by and large shifted to London, which made negotiations around Brexit even more complex. So here they are, these 130 or so people having dinner and drafting a manifesto and then visiting their installation on the outside of the Ulster Museum. And what you will see in this installation is a very large and very beautiful 3-screen projector by Mark Thomas with sound by Penrith developed. Now I want to briefly show you another large installation that I'm very excited. It's only the second time it's shown. This is an installation by Unique Holland, a longtime collaborator, and myself, that is on 10 years of work called the Oakland Projects. It's a series of performances, workshops, training sessions, all staged along with a mass media campaign throughout the 90s in Oakland, California. And this is a very unique town with a very strong history of diversity activism. Black Lives Matter was formed in Oakland, and well, it was formed by activists from Oakland. Let me be quite specific. And in this installation, you'll see archival materials and videos of these projects and the perspective of young people in the various performances. And I'm just going to show you one of the more intense ones, 2 minutes from Code 33, a project with police and youth on a rooftop in downtown Oakland.
I haven't had a single positive experience in my life. So, but to tell you the truth, I couldn't be around police without my stomach turning.
In 10 years as a police officer, I have never seen a police officer hit a person that's been handcuffed. I'm not saying that that does not happen. Obviously, it happens, but I have never seen it.
It happened in Riverside to a young girl. What are you talking about? That never happened. I get shot down. Now because you're a cop and because you made a mistake that I was reaching for something and because you ran my name and 4 years ago I have something on my record. I got shot and it's okay. You may not even lose your job. That's how you're above the law. You can't, and you have to admit that.
Let me give you an example. A decorated cop, all right? 15 years in the force, kicking ass. The whole 15 years he's on.
The whole 15 years.
Meaning he's been making, hey, that's right. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a good cop. I didn't say he was doing anything against him. I'm talking about a good cop. 15 years on the streets, all right? Everybody knows him. Everybody likes him in the department. Citizens, like, he goes out there and makes a mistake like that. What do you think should happen to him? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. That's your attitude, though. Hey, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. A good cop like that probably has 10 more years on the streets. He makes one freaking mistake. That's how people are. Screw him, get him out of there.
15 years on the street kicking ass, whatever, right? He makes one mistake, but we're on the streets and we make one mistake, and what happens to us?
Make one mistake, meaning what? One mistake about what?
25, you a hell.
Break the law.
I don't understand what you mean.
Like breaking the law. Saying if young people break the law, they don't get a second chance.
That's not true. That is not true.
Especially not young.
That is
not true at all.
True.
We just got done. We got here late here on a case where a guy just paroled after doing 3 years for murder. He did 3 years for murder. Okay, so there are second chances.
And finally, I want to close with Uncertain Futures, a project on women, work, and aging at the Manchester Art Gallery, which is on now. I'm really excited about this project, and this week I get to meet everybody for the first time in person. But we've been meeting for over a year together online every single week. And this group of very activist, engaged women are working in a variety of ways in a variety of communities to enhance the political positioning, the welfare, and the training and abilities of women around the issue of work. That's the idea of our project, but it's a very intersectional project. It involves disability, migration, aging, racism, cultural perspective, and all of these things are coming together in a project that we've developed for the gallery. In the art gallery, we've been meeting, part of our meeting, and over on the right is Alistair Hudson, who's meeting with us to talk to the women. We have 2 university researchers that we're working with, and we decided to do a project where we interviewed 100 women in the middle of the gallery exhibition. So we created an interview space that's like a sound recording booth, and each of these 15 advisors, and Ruth Edson, who works at the museum, is my collaborator with these women on this project. Each of these 15 women brought other women from their community network speaking multiple languages to be interviewed for an hour within the gallery. For most of these women, it was the first time they were in the gallery, and we were asking them questions about their experiences of work, in work, getting work, out of work, caring for families, all of the issues that COVID exposed culturally in both England and America, having to do with the care and the welfare of society, largely delivered by unpaid women. This is the interview booth in the middle of the installation. You see reflected on this glass is work, the painting Work by Ford Madox Brown. Here's the room. So on one side of the room is Work, the Ford Madox Brown. On the other side is the interview booth. And you can look at a video called Cleaning Conditions that was part of an earlier project I did on labor in Manchester at the Manchester Art Gallery. And you can, when there's no interview going on, you can go inside that booth or look at it from the outside. Here's another installation by Mark Thomas in which a soundtrack is accompanied by language which you can see through the window. And it's these older women on the advisory committee talking about their experiences with work. Each interview has been transcribed and created for, basically had names redacted and identifying information redacted, and then it's posted on the wall of the gallery. And now that 100 interviews have been completed, we're moving on to stage 2, and that's the assessment of the research by these women with the university professors Elaine Dewhurst and Sarah Campbell. And that information is, I think, going to be quite revolutionary. I'm not sure where data exists like this. That is 100 women speaking different languages from different countries living in Manchester, talking about their experiences with work and economics. And this installation is now transformed into an office space. You can still come and go as a member of the public, and we will be hosting workshops co-sponsored by City Council, training for people, informational events, and we will be reviewing the research and presenting it in various forms over the course of the next few months. So you can see how each of these projects essentially creates a prototype for an activity: teenagers and media literacy, older women, work, economy, and leadership. The Irish project having to do with the impact of Brexit and the various borders that exist, even and including the division between urban and rural in this region. And finally, the circle and the square, looking at social cohesion between Muslim and Christian groups and thinking about culturally how much stronger and richer we will be with a deeper integration. And I think it's particularly pertinent now with Rakid. It's not Rakid. What's his name? The sports, the cricketer, Rakim, who's been talking on television yesterday. I saw it it was very, very moving, his testimony, and I hope that it supports England in becoming much more open culturally to this group of people in your country. And that's it for what I have to show you. And I'm wondering now if we could entertain not only questions, but comments. I'm really happy to have you participate with me in a conversation, and I guess with Helen Little.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's been such a pleasure to have you talk to us today, and I'm so thrilled that the timing of your work being on display at Leeds Art Gallery chimes with you being here in the UK and with all of these wonderful projects happening in Manchester that we're really excited and look forward to seeing soon. Just to remind everybody, I'm Helen Little. I'm Curator of Exhibitions at Leeds Art Gallery, and I'm just going to be chairing this Q&A with Suzanne for the next 20 minutes or so. We'll see how long it rolls on. We've already received, actually, Suzanne, some really interesting questions in advance of the event, either from visitors to Leeds Art Gallery or students at Leeds Beckett University, which I'm going to use to kickstart the session. But if anyone else in the audience would like to ask a question to Suzanne, or a provocation or a statement or comment, please send it via the slido.com website using the hashtag LSA-SL, or failing that, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, via the chat function in this platform, which our facilitators will then forward to Slido, and I'll do my very best to get through as many of them as I can. Some of the questions I have in front of me, Suzanne, relate specifically to Whisper the Waves, the Wind, that I hope you won't mind me starting with. And as Marion mentioned in her introduction, this work is, of course, on display at Leeds Art Gallery as part of our current season, celebrating 40 years of artists' film and video in our collection. And when I was thinking about how to present this show, I became really interested in how our relationship to art has changed as a result of the sweeping digitization of arts and culture, and how this seems like a really important moment to remind ourselves about the powerful experience of encountering artist film and video in a gallery setting, and to look again at so many of the works in the collection, including yours, that sort of speak to and call attention to community and participation and memory in these very fractured times. So I wanted to start with two questions from visitors to the show that relate to both your experiences as an artist and challenges as an artist, and to some of the crucial themes of your early work. Suzanne, you've said in the past that you feel that you have an ethical obligation as a person to make the world more equitable, and I think this first question speaks to that commitment, and it asks, as a working class woman and artist, what difficulties have you encountered in a middle class art world?
I don't even know if the art world's middle class. I would actually call the art world slightly upper class. It's definitely filled with professionals, and that is one mark of class, although I think that in this country, you have a much different, more robust conversation about class than we do. But I think that within what I would say, one of the main issues that I've encountered is this prejudice against a certain kind of what appears to be obvious or didactic in terms of including social issues in work. And I think part of that's the legacy of social and community-based practices, which took place here at the same time as they did in the United States. And if you want to turn that off, that would be great right there. so I think that's part of it, that social practice actually entered the discourse, I think, through the activism of artists of my generation, but it's seldom seen as connected to that. It's actually historically often connected to a kind of Western European philosophical tradition, which is, of course, important and informative, but certainly in my experience, I remember when a major critic called up my friend Mary Jane Jacob and asked if Richard Serra had made me into a social practice artist. And I sort of laughed because the Tilted Arc was way after most of the people I know had begun to work in these areas, and we came into them for very political reasons. So I would say that's one thing. There's a level of what Peter Ely once called irony on a panel I was in, and not believing that feminists had irony. There's a level of irony that's entered the visual arts discourse, and a kind of a distancing that exists. I am not actually against those ideas. What I'm against is the fact that people, I think there is a class distinction between the representation of issues in a way that a broad populace can understand it, and a sort of an intellectual rigor. And I think that for me, those two poles are really important, and I think about them a lot. But I think that that's not always recognized in my work. Crystal Quilt looks like an emotional tug on the heartstrings of those of us who care about our mothers and grandmothers. And it is that. It's a whole lot more complicated, not only in terms of production strategies, but in the ideas behind it. So I think that's one of the issues that I've experienced as a working class woman.
Thank you. That's really wonderful. The second question from our gallery audience specifically relates to some of the environmental themes that crop up in the conversations among some of the participants of Whisper the Waves, the Wind, particularly the section where some of the women, many of the women in fact, talk about their fears for the future. And this particular question asks, following the mentions of green pollution in 1984, do you have anything to say to the people who have stopped any change from happening? And how do you feel about this same issue being present in the modern day? That's a really big one for you.
I would not distinguish that from all the other issues of retraction. I mean, I think that, when Trump was elected, many women that I know and activists that I know who've been working since, the late 60s on social issues, went to bed and could barely get out. I got vertigo myself, couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. And I think it's sort of, it's, like also seeing the reflection in the Me Too movement of the violence against women, taking that on as an issue, watching from, abolition to civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter and those sort of trajectories. After you've lived for a while, you begin to develop a sort of historical understanding of what Susan Faludi called backlash, which is the way in which we progress over time. One of the difficulties I find is working with students who don't seem to have a sense of historical trajectory. They live in the moment and they think in the moment, and they don't understand the way different ideas are represented over time, and often don't understand in their wonderful youthful impatience the fact that in many of these areas there's been a lot of progress and there is a lot of retraction. So climate, I actually think climate is moving forward, maybe not fast enough, climate issues, maybe not fast enough to save us, but we're not remotely close to ending worldwide global violence against women either. And I thought we would be by now when I began working quite optimistically in the 70s.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful stuff. Whisper the Waves, the Wind is part of a broader program that you call the Whisper Project that has had, I believe, numerous iterations since then. And I love how evocative the word whisper is in this context, and the way that you use it to suggest a voice or a conversation that is veiled or secret in some way, that you are surfacing by bringing it into a sort of broader public realm. And you've talked about how conversations between people can be, on the one hand, very beautiful, exquisitely beautiful, but also that they can fail quite miserably as art. And I suppose this relates to how people, rather than objects, are the forms of your work. And I wonder if you could say something about how this shift came about in your practice and how you deal with the possibilities of disruption, or dare I say it, failure, that working with people presents.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you. Failure is an ever-present opportunity of my work. And there are projects that I would consider a failure in a variety of ways. I don't know if there was really a shift. I think there are kinds of works, but not particularly a shift. Because I came, I have a degree in zoology and was very, going to be a doctor, and I was very interested in psychology and community-based psychology and racism since I've been very, very young. Since 10 at least, I was interested in racial prejudice and how do you counter it. And I think that that because I have those interests, I came into art with a different set of ideas and backgrounds, and I was older when I went to Cal Arts. I mean, I met Judy Chicago, and I think I was interested in joining her group at Fresno because of the feminism. She is brilliant, was really a great teacher and friend, and a person who really was serious about nurturing a feminist aesthetic and bringing women forward, but also challenging aesthetic boundaries. And coming out of that experience, and after meeting Capro at Cal Arts, and that was really where I began my art training, so quite late, I already had a discursive practice having nothing to do with art. I led groups. I was, a young teacher in college, and had always been interested in cross-racial discourse and so on. So I think that both Judy and Alan showed me ways in which discourse and relationality would be able to enter the art world. And of course, early on, that was the primary property of political theorists on one hand and community organizer artists, of which you have many, many here in England, on the other hand. And by the way, there was a strong communication, at least I had, with British artists, everybody from Mary Kelly to Conrad Atkinson and Margaret Harrison and Susan Hiller. There was, within the performance political gang, there was a global discourse going on. There weren't that many of us. And so the same ideas that were incorporated governmentally here in England, and not so much in the United States, coming and going, but not so much, were really, how does art have a political, community, healthful opportunity, possibility? And of course, discourse is the way you would manifest that in the arts. I mean, setting aside, there's all these complications of, whether or not discourse is an art form. Now it is, then it was not. And so at the point I was doing 3 Weeks in May, for example, or whisper projects, there was this idea of platforming that you would now call it in the art world, that is an aesthetic position that came out of a political position, if that makes sense. Like 3 Weeks in May, the project on violence against women, the first large-scale project I did, had 30 different events over 3 weeks. And so today you would convene it and call it a platform as part of an art fair. But at that point in time, I was at least structuring it as part of a complex performative gesture coming out of Capro's thinking, and Judy Chicago's, really.
And something has just popped up on my screen that sort of relates to these issues around working with people, and it is, would you say it is more challenging making art with or about a community that you're part of, or one that you're not part of?
I don't know that I would notice the difference.
Yeah.
There's me and other people, and whoever the other people are, whether they are women who either have experienced violence or, I do think this issue of being part of and not being part of is critical. And it, by the way, surfaces at different points historically. Right now it's surfacing around race. And it surfaced around race in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, particularly early 80s. And so because I'd been involved with cross-racial conversation since literally I was 10, that I've seen the moments where the white positionality shifts. And we are going through another such shift. I consider these shifts more or less positive, even if painful. And so I think it also, this notion of being part of or not part of, surfaces around the ideas of artists working internationally. And so if I go to South America, to Ecuador, or to Colombia to work with an anthropologist and a historian and a group of activists who've invited me there, I am quite aware of the burden as an American, not only whiteness, but American, being from the United States, the burden of that with my practice there. And is it different when I'm invited and asked to help resolve some issues aesthetically in their particular area? Or is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? When I was growing up, to speak cross-racially was negative. It was not done. So, you know, I really come from a very specific position, but I am aware enough that, you know, when I come to England, I represent something. When I go to Latin America, I represent something. When I don't speak Russian, I represent something. So I think there are really complex issues around identity that oddly come up in visual art in a way they do not come up in film and writing. It's odd to me that a writer can represent any identity without challenge, but a visual artist cannot speak representationally. I've developed strategies that come out of my political engagement. For example, if you'll notice, most of my works are quite multivocal. And I do never tell people what they have to say. I never script, but I do choreograph conversations, and the choreography comes out of my collaboration with the speakers. So in the case of the Oakland projects, for example, the one veto that me and the other artists I was working with gave the teenagers was, sorry, young men in 1990 of Oakland, you can't diss gay people, because the one thing they all wanted, the boys all wanted to do, was talk about how horrible it was to be gay. And we said, you can, and of course, basically 220 kids, I can't stop them saying whatever they want to say, but I could, in the case of the Oakland projects, work with them to choreograph the themes that they would like to address and hope that they didn't address how much they hated gay people.
I just wanted to throw in, actually, we've had a really lovely comment from somebody called Bo from Korea, who said that they were very happy to see Across and In Between, that they found that work really stunning. And they are a geography researcher, and that their research topic is islandness, which seems kind of interesting in relation to what you were just talking about. So thank you both for that. We've had some questions that speak to the legacy of your performances and how they have become transferable tools for engaging younger artists and younger audiences, today. And one of our audience members says, hello, Suzanne, I've recently discovered your work in seminars and in the Women Art Revolution film by Lynn Herman Leeson. And I've really enjoyed finding out more about your practice. And I feel that a lot of your earlier works and ideas still speak to my generation and are relevant now. So thank you for that. But I think that sort of leads into the question, what is it about the times that we live in that your earlier works, including Whisper the Waves of Winds, but obviously others as well, continue to speak to?
What is the issue?
What is it about the times that we live in that your earlier works continue to speak to younger audiences?
Yeah, first off, it's Lynn Herman Leeson.
Oh, forgive me.
That's all right. She's a very good friend and a really revolutionarily early computer / video artist. And you all should be looking at her work if you aren't. I think there are similarities in the times, but again, I've lived through more than a couple of decades. One thing that I think creates the relationship between the 70s and now is the wars in Afghanistan and Vietnam. I think that social concern with young people really was evolutionary, was evolving in a very powerful, significant way in the 70s. I think it is again today that youth have been activated in political ways. They're much more conscious of politics. You can see from the Black Lives Matter marches in the United States, the diversity of engagement. So I think war, I think austerity, you would call it austerity. I think the gap between the rich and the poor is leaving out any sort of notion of middle classness, really. And at least in our country, that I think is a huge phenomenon, that the poor and the almost poor, or quite fragile in terms of their economic position, and the sort of battle around whether they believe themselves to be middle class without understanding that, that the social welfare programs that you have here are not even imagined in the United States. I think those kinds of gaps still exist and make the relationship between these eras the same. But I also think social media probably has the role now that television had, and those communication methods back in the 70s. I think we got a hold of, as artists and journalists, we got a hold of porta packs and we ran all over interviewing people. We don't have to do that anymore. We might do it, but we don't have to do it. That has been taken over by journalists. But I think that there's a global exchange of information and issues that is also very similar. You would almost compare the movement that I referred to in Silver Action with the Southern Black sisters who were creating an international march around the incidents of rape and murder in India at the time in 2013. You could compare that to the International Tribunal of Crimes Against Women, where Simone de Beauvoir spoke in 75, I think. And that was a gathering of feminists from all over the world looking at forms of violence in their cultures. So they're just different forms of organizing, but they're these sort of moments when the opportunity to travel is not unlike the opportunity to exchange information through social media.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I've got at least two more I'd like to squeeze in. There's quite a few people who seem to be very interested in some of the mechanics of realizing your projects, and who are interested to hear more about how you've tackled what seemed to be a series of increasingly ambitious events that take place over long periods of time, and in turn how that affects how you like to present your work in a gallery context. And on that basis, one of our audience members would like to know, for Whisper the Waves, the Wind, how did you choose the location and the time of the performance? And leading on from this, that leads into another question, which is, what does revisiting past performances in or out of gallery context enable you to do to investigate or draw attention to?
I would say quite simply, revisiting a performance, which isn't something I would take on with every work, has to appeal to me, and it has to have relevance to its time and location. So I mean, I think that's quite a simple and direct answer to that. I think choosing a time and location is a complex process, and even choosing an image, often images, I don't like some artists come in with an image, and I generally enter a community without an image, and images occur through the process of conversation. So the Whisper the Waves the Wind location was, we for some reason wanted it on a beach. I think it was because in that case I'd been working on the project, and the art historian Moira Roth had talked to me late night when I was staying with her, and I woke up in the night having dreamt about her mentor, Rose, who was like a mother to her, and I imagined her on a beach. And so I went back to the groups I was working with and said, what about a beach, blah, blah. You know, the project, the images evolved. And then we went to beaches throughout Southern California and selected La Jolla because of the very particular visual framings. And when you work in public space, the ability to create an aesthetic frame, a kind of, you know, both a time frame and a logical / conceptual frame and a visual frame is very important. Just like with the crystal quilt, we thought about colors because the East Asian women, for them, white was a color of mourning. So we talked that through about culturally, could we use white? Should we use other colors? What color was appropriate? And so on. I think a bigger issue, just to flag up around this, is the last 3 projects before 3 I'm working on now, the What Kind of City and other 2 projects I mentioned. The 3 projects before were based on a very specific question, and that is, because it's so easy to deceive viewers about the community engagement aspects of a work when you encounter it in a gallery. And I could talk for an hour about forms of deception. Because it's so easy, it's a very complex thing for a social practice or community engaged artist to show relationality. And if you notice that some of it moved into the art world through very scripted, contained, those tended to come from theory a little more than from activism, but those conversations first started entering the biennials. And then you would see community engagement people doing everything from a mural on a wall to getting a lot of people to come into the gallery. That was a strategy for a while. You would see 15 people in a gallery, but it's very hard to note the difference between 15 and 500. And it's very hard to note scale, length of time, engagement with ideas. So I began 3 projects with my own aesthetic question. Could you work comprehensively and ethically within a community responsibly? And could you create an installation that communicates with the sophistication and beauty of the tools available to us as artists today within a gallery? And so that's the subject of 2 of the pieces that of the 3. One is in Ecuador on violence against women. We're not showing that, but the circle and the square and across and in between are sort of completion of that body of ideas. How do you operate with integrity in 2 different, very different environments?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions that are really getting down to the nitty-gritty in terms of the logistics and the sort of social, the responsibilities of somebody who has a social practice. You've talked a lot about how art has a lot to do with solving problems and that it allows you to make things happen in life. And one of the questions I've just seen is one that I suspect comes from somebody who is currently developing their own performative-based practice. We've had quite a few questions actually about what advice you would give to younger practitioners in this field. And these questions are to do with the roles and responsibilities that I, as a curator, know that are being addressed in public institutions. And the question is quite simply, do you pay your participants? And the person that asks this question has gone on to say that they know from their own experiences that many participants and collaborators refuse to accept money, but that they have subsequently been criticised, not by the participants, but by others who have said that regardless of their experiences, the performers should be paid properly. And that this is in fact very challenging when you're working with groups of people, and wonder what kind of policy you have on this and how this may have changed from working on something like Whisper the Waves of the Wind to how your projects have evolved in their complexity and in new contexts and appreciations for these matters.
Yeah, well, let me first speak to my position as how I employ myself. I'm a teacher. I have a full-time job as a college professor. I'm lucky that way. I've been an administrator. And I think it's appropriate for me to get my money from other sources, given the kind of people that I generally work with, often who are poor or disenfranchised in some way. So I might get a small amount of money for a year's worth of a project, but I don't make a living on my projects in any way. So that's a position that's hard on me physically, and I wish I didn't have to do it. On the other hand, kind of gets me out of the idea that I'm going to come in and make, 50 grand over the course of a year, and everybody else isn't going to get any money because there's not that much money in a project. In terms of paying participants, colleagues, collaborators, and for services, I tend to never pay participants of a performance, and nor do I have any way of coercing them to be there. So that's pretty voluntary, and that is, I might pay support for them to be there. But most of the money, I would say the significant well over 50% of money, and by the way, I've analyzed this on different projects in justifying them to mayors and things, but most of the money goes to the planners, the collaborators, the coordinators. And the reason for that is they need their time paid for. It used to be you could get a lot of volunteers, but that's not the case anymore economically, particularly in urban areas. So I might have, like at the Creative Time Project that people always criticize me for not paying performers. I did insist that they hire people of color to work on my project. And then the other thing that you pay for is services. It's pretty hard to get a filmmaker to do a project without paying them. So it tends to be the filmmakers and the tech people make more money than anybody else. But if they're a planner and a central, and I tend to also use the socialist adage, if you are working at a full-time job like I do, I don't need that money to the degree that somebody who says, yeah, I'm moving forward in the project, because my projects sort of become more and more, collaborative. People come into and exit collaborative processes over a long period of time. So I tend to try to pay people as they need it. And, I might pay someone more who's an organizer who doesn't have a job than I would pay somebody who's an organizer, but who has another job. But those are all quite negotiated and pretty transparent. At this point, I don't deal with it because other people do it, but I come from a background where I produced all my own work, made these decisions consistently over time, and paid youth workers. You have to pay money to support youth. You have to give them buses, transportation, feed them. And if they were on an advisory committee, of course they got paid. So, they're complex structures that I work within, and I think a lot about, because obviously, economics is key to my issues.
Yeah, that's great. I think it ties in, and I think just to sort of close, I guess, I think there's a couple of people who are very keen to hear from you about what you've learned as your practice has developed, and what advice you would give to younger practitioners. It's probably a nicer way to end than on the matters of finance.
You mean after 40 years, what I've learned? I would say everything I know I've learned. I mean, that's an impossible question.
I know.
Advice, though, I could give advice. I think you don't enter this work if you want to be famous. I think you don't enter this work unless you're willing to work pretty hard in a detailed fashion, and you have some level of sophistication about creating relationships. If you're always breaking up with your boyfriend, this may not be the best practice for you to get involved with, or having screaming fights with people. You really need to think a lot about how you impact people and how people need to have conversation to work these difficult issues through. And you probably have to have a pretty thick skin, because it's really not fun to, be challenged, and particularly this is true for everybody working cross-racially. You really have to not try to defend yourself. It's the most important thing I would say, particularly to white people, is, shut up and listen, as the teenager said in Oakland. Just shut up and listen.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's great. Thank you. Marion, would you like to close?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to move. I've had the pleasure of sitting here listening to Suzanne. Thank you so much, Helen, for sharing the questions, and an enormous thank you to Suzanne. That's been the most pleasurable hour and a half to be here with you. So a huge thank you, and a huge thank you to the Whitworth for allowing us to be here this afternoon. And to you, Helen, and also to Catherine O'Riordan behind the scenes there, who has produced this talk this afternoon for us. And over the last few days we've done it, which is amazing, fantastic. Also to Rachel Zarozetsky, who's Suzanne's studio assistant as well, who was instrumental in the early days of setting up this talk for us before Suzanne arrived in the UK. And to Emmeline Baker and Dave Turner, also at Leeds Beckett University, for their support in the Inside Out programme. Thank you all for attending today. And just to draw your attention to our next talk, which is on the 12th of January, with Professor Kate Fletcher, who works as the Professor at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion at the University of Arts in London. And Kate will be delivering an Inside Out lecture on her research and her recent publication around fashion and nature and sustainability. So that leaves me to say goodbye from Manchester. Suzanne, goodbye.
Goodbye.
And thank you all for attending. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Helen.